Welcome, everybody, to the Lectern. I'm here with somebody you probably recognize. This is Seth Allison. And Seth Allison and I have had several conversations about internal family systems, therapy, about ally work and related phenomena, some aspects of Jung. And I wanted to get Seth on again. It's always a joy to talk to him. I'd like to have him on fairly regularly. He brings a missing psychodynamic wisdom to this platform in a very valuable way. There's a couple other people that do that. Kasra does that too, and I'll get him on as well. I'll reach out to him again. But Seth, in case people don't know who you are, can you just say a little bit about yourself and how you found my work and how it all came together?
Thank you, John. Yeah. I just want to say it's really a joy, to be back here with you. And I've our talks, starting with attachment and kind of integrating attachment theory and wisdom, and then moving into IFS. And I first off, I'm a therapist by training. I have had an interesting journey since last time we talked, and I've begun leaning into some other shapes, I guess, in the world. So we'll talk about that. But I just want to begin by acknowledging something, and you and I spoke about this, and that it felt serendipitous, even maybe synchronous, that our paths crossed. I did not know about your work, but through someone that I was working with who was in your orbit, he decided it was important that we talk. And so as often happens in liminal periods of life, Hermes shows up in disguise and drops us into certain places at the right time. And I wanted to say publicly that, our conversations had a huge impact on my life, and that professionally, those who watched this and connected to me and to our conversation reached out. And what happened was a kind of switch in fittedness, a subtle one, as I showed up here, and what got pulled in were folks who could really relate. And
Wow.
So I've had the privilege of working in what I would call like a greater congruence with who I am. And I would like to thank you for that, because it's not just the platform, but it was specifically, the dialogos with you that brought forward parts of me that I've wanted to have forward more publicly. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. The Socratic aspiration is to be a midwife and help somebody to give birth to themselves, and the way you're talking so that they can aspire to a good life. It sounds like I was helpful in that regard, and that means a lot to me. I'm glad that that has brought you different, I don't know how you refer to them, clientele or different people to
clients. Yeah, that's fine.
Different clientele. Just to be clear, I heartily endorse Seth for those of you who are looking for psychotherapy that has this kind of, I would call it spiritual depth, and it brings in the imaginal, brings in the dialogical in very profound ways, very effective, very powerful. And then behind it, you have a man with a deep heart, a lot of wisdom, a lot of insight. And what has become clear to me, I won't go into details because they're confidential, but Seth and I have been talking offline, tremendous amount of integrity, a tremendous amount of moral integrity that has at times cost him. He's being modest as befits him. And as I say, I won't go into details, but the things you're looking for in a therapist are, ability to establish great rapport, ability to access the imaginal, the dialogical aspects of your cognition and your consciousness, and somebody with tremendous moral integrity so they can be absolutely trustworthy for you, and that that they can be committed to your well-being in a comprehensive manner. And this is Seth in spades. So I just wanted to say that. Now, all that being said, we're not going to talk quite so therapeutically today. Seth has proposed a very interesting topic to me. I've been doing a lot of work on what I call voluntary necessity. Some of you may have seen the video when I talked about it with Bishop Maximus. I've been talking about it here and there. There's an extended presentation from the Leading Edge Conference, which we're going to release on my channel. I gave Seth a heads up viewing of it. And then he reached out, and because we were talking about, like, we both knew we wanted to talk or what, and it's always that. And you don't want to just like I don't like to have my top drawer list of things. And Seth proposed, well, there's a sort of I'm turning around this idea, this quote, in fact, from Bonhoeffer, and making deep connections between it, what the spiritual religious life mean, voluntary necessity, how that connects to what I do. And if I'm getting any of this wrong, Seth, please say so. And then he said, why don't we go into that? And so I'll turn things over to you now, Seth.
Thank you, John. And that was very kind. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. You ready? Yeah. I want to give just the heading on this. And I also want to say, as we do this, we let the logos take over. We see where it goes.
Exactly.
One of the things that I've learned is, as I shared kind of in our first conversation, there's something very powerful about authenticity. I'm comfortable, and I'm going to endeavor to use some of my own narrative. And I hope that doesn't feel indulgent to people. I hope it is illustrative, because I think what we're going to get to is these different kinds of knowing that you talk about quite a bit.
Yes.
And I think Bonhoeffer is looking at sort of this, I don't know if we call it maybe a top-down kind of movement, from first half of life to second half of life, from a procedural kind of knowing into, through kind of procedural, perspectival, all the way down to participatory.
Right.
And that is kind of, that is where I kind of find myself, and I find the most passion and excitement in the work I get to do. So the only thing I want to set up with this quote is that, I come from an evangelical background originally. I would no longer identify with that. I do not identify as a Christian. But I was introduced to this. Bonhoeffer was popular. He wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. It is interesting to me that this quote begins while he is in a Nazi concentration camp. He's looking at the end of his life, and
because
he's writing.
He was actively resisting the Nazis, very actively, very brave.
Very brave, even connected to an assassination attempt of Hitler. And so he's writing to a friend as he nears the end of his life in this situation. And I'll just read the quote.
Please.
And then we'll see what comes. Okay. I remember a conversation that I had in America 13 years ago with a young French pastor. We were asking ourselves quite simply what we wanted to do with our lives. He said that he would like to become a saint, and I think it quite likely that he did become one. At the time, I was very impressed, but I disagreed with him and said, in effect, that I should like to learn to have faith. For a long time, I didn't realize the depth of the contrast. I thought I could acquire faith by trying to live a holy life or something like it. I suppose I wrote The Cost of Discipleship at the end of that path. Today, I can see the dangers of that book, though I still stand by what I wrote. I discovered later, and I am still discovering right up to this moment, that it is only by living completely in this world that one learns to have faith. One must completely abandon any attempt to make something of oneself, whether it be a saint or a converted sinner, a churchman, a righteous man, or an unrighteous one, a sick man or a healthy one. By this worldliness, I mean living unreservedly in life's duties, problems, successes, and failures, experiences, and perplexities. In so doing, we throw ourselves completely into the arms of God, taking seriously not our own sufferings, but those of God in the world, watching with Christ in Gethsemane. That, I think, is faith. That is metanoia. And that is how one becomes a man and a Christian. How can success make us arrogant or failure lead us astray when we share in God's sufferings through a life of that kind? There are many, many things that come alive for me with that quote. I first read it when I was 21 and beginning to release as best I could some of the things that I was holding on to in Christianity that could no longer be held on to. And very few things from college have stayed with me the way this quote has stayed with me. And it's played a really interesting role in the last few years. So I'm going to kind of pause there a second. I'd be really curious just what came alive for you, what connected for you, and then we can kind of dig in deeper.
Well, I mean, a couple of things, probably having to do that, I'm teaching Seeing God again for the first time on a lectern, and this idea about deconstructing the gridlock of modernity, opening us up to recovering, even exapting our senses into a spiritual sensibility, transcendence, seeing more deeply into reality, hearing the call of voluntary necessity, making contact with what is real, most real, in a transformative way. And what pinged that in me in the Bonhoeffer quote was his utter rejection of faith as some kind of seeking connection, belief in a supernatural domain. That he was just, that's putting aside. And then secondly, he was putting aside the notion of faith as the modern interpretation of it, which is progress. So he's rejecting, to my mind, right away, two notions of faith that were both born in the European Enlightenment. One is faith is believing in the supernatural without any possible reason or evidence. Or if you're not religious, faith is, although it's still a kind of religion, faith is the utopic, I'm going to make something of myself. And of course, we still have this faith. We have come to equate meaning with success. And then what he shifts to my mind, although he doesn't use the word, but he talks about, participating in God, which he also puts in brackets life. And I think he means this kind of deep kind of participation in God, not just having thoughts or doctrines about God. Yes.
Sorry, could I clarify something? Those are my brackets. I should have sent you a clean document, but I was right where you are right now with.
Okay.
I want to make this.
Yeah,
he uses God, just so we're clear.
Okay. So anyway, I'll take your intuition, though, that because he's talking about that, he's talking about something that grounds him in a profound way, because he he sets this aside from a moral dimension. This is not about doing your duty. So I think he's talking, for me, you put in brackets. Okay, you did it. You put in the brackets life. I would put in religio, a sense of connectedness as an agent, a self, a person. And then in there, the other thing that came up for me was I heard Socrates. I heard Socrates as, this, I heard the language, right, of metanoia, and about neither giving into despair nor arrogance, the commitment to one's finite transcendence, really wrestling with the problems of life, going into the ancient agora, the way Socrates says. The tonos, all of that. And, people can accuse me, rightly, although I don't think it's totally fair, but I can see how they could do it. Well, you talk all about the stuff you talk about because you're you have a life of privilege, you're white male, you're an academic, ivory tower. I would like to remind people that I grew up in a kind of very harsh and horrible poverty, very traumatizing psychologically kind of environment. So be a little bit careful with your ascriptions, please. But let's give it to you that's what I am. That's not what he is. He's in prison about to die. He's in prison about to die because he has taken a stand against the Nazis. And so he's not stating this from a comforting kind of self-indulgence. He's stating this as what is absolutely vital to holding him to his integrity in the face of imminent, and let's face it, it's going to be a horrible death too. The Nazis are not going to give him a nice clean execution. They're going to do all kinds of horrible things to him. So that really resonated with me because it's this is resonance realization. It rings so true if somebody can say in those situations, this enhanced religio in this world, this deep connectedness, this participation in God, theosis, that is accessible, and not only accessible, it afforded his courage and his resilience.
Beautiful. So there's a lot that for folks that might, end up listening to this, that I would love to pause on a lot of things you said and have you expand. And I feel the excitement coming on. So you didn't say relevance realization. You said resonance realization. Yeah. And in your talk, which I had the privilege to watch and actually sat with for hours, you distinguished those. I was wondering if you'd be willing to distinguish them.
Oh, yeah. So for me, everybody, if you've seen anything by me at all, you know what relevance realization is. That sense of connectedness, of optimal grip, because we're having to ignore the irrelevant, focus in on what's relevant, and all that. For me, when this is a little bit beyond what was going on in the talk, but you'll see the connection. Resonance realization is when we start to awaken the spiritual senses. Now, I don't mean anything supernatural by that. I mean the exaptation of our sensory motor, which our cognition is doing all the time right now. Gesture is an exaptation, metaphor is an exaptation.
Can you define exapt?
Yeah, so exapt is to take something that was evolved, that's the biological sense, or learned, that's the cognitive sense, for one purpose, and then repurposing it, restructuring it, like reconfiguring what is foreground and background in it for another purpose. So a biological example is I'm using my tongue to speak. Tongues did not originally evolve for speech because many organisms have tongues and do not talk. So I take my sensory motor abilities to orient and navigate, and I use them to orient and navigate in abstract conceptual space. And I'll mark that with gestures that take sensory motor, right, and so forth. That's exaptation. And we just got a paper published, yay, on cognitive continuum from fluency to mystical experience that makes a strong case for noesis, which is a Greek term for perspectival knowing by orienting and noticing, by making things salient, by sizing things up. Perspectival knowing, namely. And what's going on there is you're taking the machinery that's used for sight, and it's being repurposed for insight. Yep. And then the insight becomes much more, if it cascades, you get flow, and so on and so forth. You also have a sense of hearing, and we have exapted that into the sense of being called, which is voluntary necessity. Yeah. Voluntary necessity is when you feel compelled, but it's not compulsive. So it has this weird mixture of I cannot do any other, yet I do not feel enslaved. I feel enlivened, like when I see great beauty, or I'm experiencing profound love, or I follow a beautiful argument and go, I agree with that conclusion. So at the heart of good reason and good love and good perception, beauty, we find this voluntary necessity, and it's strongly associated with the moments that we feel that we're most connected to what is real in a way that is challenging us to get more and more in contact with real. Now, that's on a continuum from a very low level in which things are calling us, like this water is appealing to me. Listen to the language. It's appealing to me. It's calling to me. And then you can move through about things like the voluntary necessity inside reason and love and beauty. And then you have what I had with Bishop Maximus. He was giving a great talk on Clement, and he was making the argument that faith is not believing without evidence and argument. It's this kind of movement, like from what you fundamentally presuppose. And I said, well, I've been thinking, and so a penny dropped from it. I said, I've been trying to get at what is this thing, the voluntary necessity? What's at the nexus of it? And I said, is that what you mean by faith? That we have to presuppose these processes, because if we say, well, I'm being misled, the only thing we can use to correct those processes is themselves. We can't ever jump out of that place. So that is the place where we stand, from which we understand, towards which we have a stance towards the world. That's faith. And then, of course, that can move, and Yaden and Newberg talk about this, into what they call prospective epiphanies, which is this sense of, you're being called to a new way of life, a new way of being. Often happens because people confront the really real. This is in Yaden's work. Now, that is prophecy in the biblical sense. It's not like a fortune teller. This is trying to get you to realize something to which you are oblivious, or perhaps even willfully ignorant. So that is the prophetic call. That is the call back to reality, to grow up, to mature, to face up, like a kid facing a parent, to face up to reality. That's spiritual hearing. That's prophetic hearing. And then what you can do, of course, is what we use this word, and this is from Kearney, it is tact. We talk about tact, somebody being tactful, or being in touch with the situation, or being close, or being intimate. These are all tactile metaphors, because touch has the capacity of, whenever I'm touching, I'm also being touched. And this has the two senses of realness. Things are confirming, but they're also surprising me. I'm assimilating and I'm accommodating, to use Piagetian terms. So touch is our best chance of getting at reality, because it's got the two senses working in cooperation. And then we can extend that and exap that to feel like I was really in touch with God, or what is most real. Those are the spiritual senses. So when the spiritual senses come alive, especially prophetic hearing, but also noetic vision and tactful touch, we're into resonance realization. And that's Hartmut Rosa's notion of those moments where we want to just behold reality, be held by reality, because we're on the sweet spot between what's in our control and what's not in its control. And that spot of criticality is also optimal for getting at reality.
Yes.
So that's what I mean by resonance. And we have this wonderful metaphor for it. We talk about things ringing true, or that sounds right to me.
So I'm very glad I asked you. And
sorry, that was a bit of a
oh, no. So, just that's a preview of the talk that you gave. And there's so much there. So you just, you kind of, with the eye of a scientist, but I think also with the eye of an artist, you're looking at and describing in such detail kind of moments in liminality where there is something that shifts, that perspectival shifts.
Yeah.
That also lead to different kinds of participation in the world.
Totally.
Different salience landscapes.
Yeah, totally.
So one of the things that I want to use this passage for is, and I guess I want to name two things. One, a lot of what I'm talking about today, if people are interested in kind of going deeper, Murray Stein's In Midlife, he's a wonderful Jungian analyst. This is a book where I may have mentioned it in one of our other talks, but, Hermes, an exploration of Hermes as a guide through midlife. Right. Wonderful.
Yes.
The other one, a lot of people may be familiar with Lerman's book.
Of course,
It's Become Real.
Lerman's book all the time. We use Lerman's book in the paper we just got published.
I mean, great. It's so. What I'm interested in, somewhat selfishly, because a lot of this is autobiography for me, and I've had to do a lot of sense making both for myself, but also professionally, it's a nice convergence, similar to probably a convergence you experienced, John.
Yes.
Coming out of where you came from, I mean, it's not a coincidence that your talents line up with this topic. Wanting to make sense out of how we know and what's trustworthy, and how to
exactly.
So I think what my focus tends to be drawn towards is a midlife experience, and really, it doesn't have to be midlife, but experiences of liminality, where and you said in your talk, I liked it, that a sense of self is a participatory through line of how you are positioned in relation to others, how you experience yourself in relation to the world, the agent arena kind of dynamic, and that liminality is when that through line gets broken in some way.
Yep.
It could be dramatically, it could be subtly. It often happens.
There's an aporia in a exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah.
And I talked about it, with you a bit about how, in my entrance into the 40s, which is the classic kind of entrance into liminality, that depression in kind of a hermetic way ends up being my guide, and not a pleasant one, but very much accompanies me to the underworld, where a sense of myself in the roles that had really nested my ego are suddenly taken or constrained, and this is what we go through. And I think Bonhoeffer speaks to it in a way that the reason the quote continues to come back to me is it offers hope about these experiences, that the entrance into a place where perspective can change, where participation in reality can change, there's a requirement to get into those, and not one that we generally choose, because the ego actually actively resists the doorways, the thresholds, which is Lyman is literally translated to.
Yeah, the threshold of a doorway. Yes, exactly.
Right. So when Bonhoeffer says one cannot learn to have faith, this is interesting because Luhrmann is looking at, in a sense, how one learns to have faith, or rather how one kindles and maintains what she calls ontological flexibility. Holding a faith frame alongside kind of a reality or ordinary life frame, right? And that there are things that cultivate. I love the line that believers are aware that they are unbelieving, and that faith takes cultivation, and that it takes practice and a community, and there are things that help make the unseen salient, but it takes effort. So do you have a thought on that?
Well, yeah, because I think, first of all, I wanted to thank you for picking up on that aspect of Bonhoeffer. And he uses the word metanoia, or is that one of you?
Yes, he does. He does.
And of course, that goes to noesis, and metanoia is seeing beyond where we normally see. It's that noetic vision, but it's also, as you said, it's a turning, it's a moving through a threshold. And that this is the cusp, and this is the pivot points, the pivoting. This always intrigues me.
This is where I'm most interested. Yes.
Yeah. And of course, this and one of the things that has come to my mind to address Plato's problem is the sense of voluntary necessity, because the problem, like you said, as you said, and I fell prey to this, is, and it looks like Bonhoeffer is too. I can manufacture God. I can manufacture a religion. I can make the religion that's not a religion. And then, of course, that is completely antithetical to the logos taking place and taking shape of its own accord and taking you someplace you are not yet thought you were going to go.
You cannot do both.
That's right. Exactly.
Right.
And Jesus was, I think he captures that when he said, you can't serve money and God. And money doesn't just mean money. It means ego, success, and accomplishment. But Jesus doesn't say don't make a living, render unto Caesar what's Caesar and all that sort of stuff. But what I'm trying to get at, and you see this in Zen, is one of my favorite quotes is, nobody realizes enlightenment by seeking it, but only the seekers become enlightened.
So great.
And so,
which is reflected in the Bonhoeffer passage.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
He's a seeker.
He's right.
He's a striver. His you even look at the title of the book, The Cost of Discipleship.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's what can I what must I do to be taught, disciple, to learn?
Right.
And so he switches it, right?
Yeah.
And I focus on, there are a few things I underline here, right? So after, it is only by living completely in the world that one learns to have faith.
But that's a great, even that.
Yeah.
Living to me, that sounds absolutely Zen. And I mean that in a complimentary sense.
Yes.
Notice what he said. He doesn't say, I don't need to learn anything. Right? I need to learn how to live completely in the world. And we think, well, what do you have to do that? Because we have been conditioned by millennia to think it's all about getting from this world. This world is the problem, and the other world. And it's like, no. Have you actually ever lived in this world completely? And I think that there's a challenge in there.
This is what I want to get at. So I also to go back to propositional, procedural, perspectival, participatory. So much of first half, so much of our culture, as you hammer this quite a bit, we exist in the propositional as if that is knowing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I hear very clearly of, no, that's not how one learns to believe in things that are unseen. And Luhrmann backs it up, but in a different way. What he does, and it's building to this idea, and I think the central thing, I'm rushing ahead here, but
go ahead.
Well, the image he invokes is one of the most powerful images in the gospel of Christ awaiting being taken towards his death in the garden, right? And it mirrors Bonhoeffer's experience at this moment. Of course,
because he's waiting. They're going to come and kill him.
But he's making a connection here. So let me, don't make anything of yourself. He's basically saying, don't even try to be a Christian.
Yes.
You're setting off in the wrong direction if you say, I'm going to make myself a Christian, which is terrifying for most Christians. It was for me. So by this worldliness, I mean living unreservedly in life's duties, problems, successes and failures, experiences and perplexities, unreservedly.
Yeah.
In so doing, we throw ourselves completely into the arms of God, and I say life.
Yeah.
Taking seriously not our own sufferings, but those of God in the world, or life. And then he says, watching with Christ in Gethsemane. So I am not a theologian. I'm sure we could get plenty of comments on how I'm misinterpreting this, but I spent a little time digging into that passage. And, I heard it growing up as Christ says, hey, come keep watch with me. And
no, that's not what it means.
I know. So I heard it as these guys fall asleep when he's saying, come, keep watch with me. A deeper reading is, this is a guy that knows what's coming. And he's about to experience, and he's anticipating betrayal, abandonment, death. He is facing existentially what we face in midlife. He is in great pain. He's in great fear. And so he's not calling his disciples to just keep watch. He's calling them to be with him in his suffering, to feel it next to him, to not be alone in it, right? So when we talk about pivot points, we talk about an entrance into a place in life where there's the possibility of greater meaning, where you have the possibility of an experience of realness, of all the good stuff that you are like in great detail describing. What is the gateway to it? According to Bonhoeffer, the gateway is a surrender, a throwing oneself into a certain kind of suffering. This is what the ego protects us from. And this is me bringing a psychodynamic sensibility to our conversation. That our system, the attachment strategies that we've used, the way that we have gripped ourselves and the relationships to the world and to those that we love, when that gets shaken, we have a moment of being called into suffering. And it's a different call than perhaps the call of purpose in the world. But I hear it as a call.
I think it is.
I think Jung heard it as a call. A call from a deeper place of things that have not been attended to. A place where things, as our defenses are surrendered, and often not by our choice, we enter a state of liminality that in my life, I came to think of it as a period where I was exhausted from rowing the boat. And I was forced to put the oars in the boat. And only by experiencing the constraint of not being able to row was I willing to put the oars in. And it was terrifying. But what it afforded me was an encounter with the currents.
Very Taoist.
And what that afforded me was the opportunity to look around and to be able to experience the arena from a different perspective. And that in turn allowed me to experience myself from a different perspective. But what called violently, it called intensely. It was both compelling, but also there was compulsion. I would not say it was a clean voluntary necessity, but there was a kind of will in it that ended up, of course, getting represented in tattoos all over my body, of surrendering to the data that was coming forward, to the fact that I could not control it the way I wanted to, and that it would need to be lived out in an arena, in reality, in order to be navigated. And I want to pause there because there's more to the story, but is this resonating for you?
A lot. So first of all, my take on Gethsemane, Jesus has previously just prayed that his disciples will be in him the way he is in God. And that's what I hear him invoking, that he's pushing towards, there's this ultimate foregrounding of participation in God, and that we best participating in God when we participate in God with others, which is a really interesting non-egoic way to think about it. And then in Gethsemane, and of course even more so on the cross, we have to my mind, the epitome of the tonos of finite transcendence. Jesus is in the garden, Bonhoeffer's in the prison. There's absolute finitude there. Their death is imminent. They are limited in space and time. They are subject to all the weaknesses of our humanity. Yet, and this is how I think Bonhoeffer is seeing like Jesus, there is ultimately still the recognition of a connection to something that transcends us. So the finite transcendence that preserves us simultaneously from slavery and tyranny. And in a sense, Bonhoeffer had been a tyrant over himself. And the ego is that kind of tyrant. or it can be. A tyrant is somebody who often starts with a legitimate rule and then becomes illegitimate in time.
Inflexible and unable to adapt.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Originally successful, but then unable. And Oedipus is a classic example of that. And of course, he suffers. And he's blinded so that because his ego no longer sees, and then he's capable of noetic insight. Right.
Oh.
Right.
Yes.
So that's all ringing through me. And then the notion of like, for me, I've been trying to understand the philosophy of pilgrimage as a meta practice that puts whatever ecology of practices you have onto a stress test to make sure that it's not falling prey into a parochialism, and where you have to do that, you have to constantly disorient yourself and reacclimatize, reinculturate. And so you're finding you start to become aware of the through line of the self that's deeper than the ego's self-image. And part of what happens here, to my mind, is the acuity. Acuity is the ability to see differences, the acuity between the ego's self-image and oneself. And
that's
of course, right. And people go, what are you talking about? I can give you, let's talk about the flow state. When you're in the flow state, the egoic self-image drops away, because all of that talk in your head about maintaining your egoic self-image, how do I look? How am I doing? Am I failing? Am I succeeding? How am I doing? What are they? All of that goes silent. This is a defining feature of the flow state. And yet, what doesn't go away is your agency. In fact, your agency and your experience of the world are enhanced. And what that shows you is the ego is lying to you when it tells you that its self-image is yourself.
Right.
And all of that is coming out for me. Now, I want the part I want to pause on is you said that you said it wasn't a pure voluntary necessity. Now, I'm wondering who it's impure for. The ego or for yourself, right? Maybe yourself is striving to love something because it recognizes something that needs to be seen. That's I mean, maybe a deeper aspect of you is acting like a prophet to the ego.
Okay, so I feel the invitation, and I invite you to bring the propositional that's floating up here down into my story. Okay,
happily.
Okay, so yes to all of that.
Okay.
So I'm gonna use some of the attachment stuff, some of the IFS stuff,
please,
to bring this alive for me. Again, forgive the personal indulgence, but it's useful.
I don't think it's indulgence. I mean, I appreciate your modesty, but I don't think it's indulgence. Indulgence is to present something for the sake of status or gratification. That's not, you're pedagogical.
So I hope so. I think there's a therapist on my shoulder saying self-disclosure, careful. But
granted.
But, and I say careful because you don't want to kind of impinge too much, you know. And
sure.
you know what it is, John. It's coming on. I'm suddenly aware of it. It's like, I did a wonderful training with a friend who gifted it to me. It was a whole weekend of kind of organizing your narrative and then projecting it forward. And we got to the end of it, and he said, I've never really ended like this with someone before, but I think this is all suggesting that your calling in life is to basically be yourself. And and I thought, okay, now that sounds great. It's a lot harder than I expected. So I think there's some ambivalence in me about just showing up as myself, sure. And yet there's a conviction that it is probably right. So thank you. So what happened? Something calls in me, it took the form of a deep longing for connection and comfort that suddenly I could not find, right?
Oh.
And as often is the case, as Jung observes, that could take the form of like sort of the contrasexual, the anima for men, animus for women. And so there was this loneliness and this longing. And as I was not aware of that contributing to the end of my marriage, but of course it was in there. But what was consciously contributing was the deep, dark depression and sadness and the longing to get out of the pain. Well, what was beneath the pain was a deep, deep longing for love and for connection that was not deceptive. That was real. That was something that must be attended to. And yet my ego could not really afford holding on to the structures that maintained me while giving space to all this kind of stuff coming up. And that is one way of talking about the symptom of depression, is that things are stuck and unable to move.
Yeah.
And so, as often is the case, things act out. And I began sort of picking up, as married very young. I was in a Christian environment. I didn't get to experience pieces of intimacy and identity that were really vital. So I entered an arena of dating, and I entered an arena of pursuing relationship. And I felt very compelled in a way that felt healthy. Like, this is an arena where I need to find my skills and who I am. And
right.
There's no shortcut for that stuff. I need an actual place to do that, right? And yet, ultimately, a solution for these feelings, it cannot be found and sustained externally in a person, at least not in the condition that I was in.
Right.
And I think generally that's true. And so what became a very useful sense of calling into exploration over a period of maybe 2 or 3 years devolved into a place of compulsion.
Oh, I see.
And this is where I lost agency.
Oh.
Where in the confusion, and this is during COVID, of course, where resources are, interpersonal resources in particular, become even more scarce,
scarcity.
right?
You're in a scarcity mentality.
I'm in a scarcity mentality, right? So here's what I want to say about addiction and about what I think you're talking about. In IFS, we call them firefighters.
Right.
And these are the parts of us that are manager parts, who are aspirational, who are risk averse, who are attempting in very good faith to help us achieve safety and abundance and whatever we want. They are really pissed at my firefighters, who have slammed the brakes on aspiration in favor of soothing and the pursuit of numbing and dissociating and managing all this stuff.
Right.
What addiction does is, if we're fortunate, it escorts us to the rocks. It washes our ship up along the shore. And in that, something happens where, we are forced to, a la like 12-step, step one, to admit what we are powerless over, right? To come to terms with compulsion. To find ourselves as suddenly taking a different perspective on what has grasped us.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, can I say something
please.
Here? Because for me, this is something I've been wrestling with. Sorry for interrupting. I'll try to be brief.
I asked you to. Yeah.
I think that the voluntary necessity is how we get through the paradox of self-transcendence. Because if I'm just pushing myself forward, it's not transcendence. And if something else is doing it, it's not self-transcendence. This is Strawson. But then I realized, and the voluntary necessity, the beauty, the calling, the Platonic stuff, but But then I realized Ricoeur's got the shadow side of that is, right? Because Ricoeur in the Symbolism of Evil says, we hit this really weird space. Something is tempting us, but what is it? It's us. We're and so that's the dark side of this. That is the dark side of self-transcendence. It's self-temptation, but with all the paradoxical understanding that self-transcendence has in it. And so I think you're taking me right to the edge of my thinking. That's one of the signs we're in dialogos, right? That when we get to that horizon where self-temptation, the exact opposite of Sophrosyn, is becoming dominant, I think parasitic processing has a field day, and I'm playing with that word, right? Like it has a field day, right?
That's good. Yes. So in that field day of parasitic processing, self is at work, and this is Jung is very hopeful about this, right?
Well, because the processes are still there. That's the fundamental for me. That's the, although it's not a foundation, but that's the bedrock of faith. That right, even the processes of self-deception are. They are precisely parasitic on the very processes that make us fundamentally adaptive. That is part of my faith. Even though that sounds like a darkness, that gives me faith. Because when I'm in the midst of this parasitic processing, I know the processes and their capacity for self-correction can be found in that depth.
At the bottom, right.
Yeah.
And right.
So Dante, you got to go down.
Completely, right. So midlife is that sort of journey. And this is why Hermes ends up being such a wonderful archetype, because there are ways in which Hermes, this trickster, shows up and helps to guide, right? So, I as somebody who, and the category in terms of kind of like how it's talked about popularly is, I found myself in love addiction, which
oh my gosh, that's one of the most insidious of addictions.
Well, because it and for a guy who makes his living by studying and applying attachment theory, the irony is not lost on me.
But I think that's often the case. I think I think precisely our strengths are the deepest doorways to self-deception for us.
So the arena of partnership, whether it was an attempt at depth in relationship or just connection, that arena with the other was extremely useful and powerful for me as I developed kind of a stronger sense of self. And what do I mean by that? I mean a broader, bigger container that could hold, part of me likes this, part of me doesn't like this. This is what I think here. This is, I show up and this is how I present in this way. Isn't that interesting? And what I wasn't aware of was that there was also a hiding that was happening in that process, a kind of escape that the firefighters in me were trying to put something out, that it wasn't a field of play, although it was a field of play, but there was a darker part to it.
Right.
And so in love, being addicted to love, the idea is that you are addicted to finding, in a la like an anxious attachment strategy, getting stuck on the side of being pulled this way and that by the emotions involved in trying to obtain and keep somebody.
Right.
Whereas an avoidance strategy is minimizing the signals in the body and staying up above and either trying to compulsively perform or compulsively caretake in order to keep that person. When you get thrust into the anxious side, where you can no longer buffer yourself from a system that is based on the fear of scarcity and the loss of proximity and the ability to regulate with somebody else, you enter a world of addiction, just like you would with alcohol or cocaine or something else, where you have highs and you have withdrawals. And to reach a point of lowness and to say, I can't I can't control this, and I don't want this. And the saliency has become very dark, and the horizons become very dark. And
did you get a sense at that point of like reciprocal narrowing? Did you get the sense that
exactly
the world and your agency
everything
in the world,
shrinks.
yeah, right,
Everything shrinks, and my agency shrinks, and the arena shrinks.
Yeah.
To the point of, suicidality for most addicts comes into play at that point, right? And I had already dealt with it earlier. So this is where I want to get to.
This is excellent. Thank you for doing this.
None of that is a moment of conversion. None of that is metanoia, right? Though there is a kind of throwing myself into life that I needed to do. I have got a tattoo of Dionysus. Jung says the archetypes come alive in the liminal space. Mm-hmm. And what did Dionysus represent for me? The disavowed parts of me that needed to be valued were sensual. They were in not in an erotic sense, but in the most basic sense.
Right.
So to go from avoidance strategies and to suddenly be connected to my body and all of its needs and longings and fears was so important, but also not something my ego could manage. So one is called to a moment of reckoning with a question about, if not myself, if I am not able to do this, then what power do I rely upon? Difficult question for atheists, was for me. There's a lot of God language, right, in recovery. But I came to understand something that Luhrmann summed up for me in a way. I've adapted it slightly, but what if faith were not necessarily pinned on a personified spiritual other, but rather a more basic idea? What if faith is a sustained, intentional, deliberative commitment to the idea that there are resources greater than yourself that can sustain you? Essentially, that you are not alone, either externally and internally. It is, in a way, permission to live relationally and dialogically. Faith is or requires the creation, or we might say discovery, of a new and very particular salience landscape that I would call trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that kind of trust can't be cultivated or learned on a conceptual level. It's lived in a participatory way.
Totally.
And it is a moment of metanoia to enter into that. It's a moment that everyone that goes through recovery, every alcoholic, has to reckon with. And it's why we think of recovery as a spiritual program. It's not about a deity. It's about a different thing. Go ahead.
Well, so much. So much. First of all, I mean, this whole notion, I've talked about this, that the life cycle of a symbol, as our symbolic abilities wither, we have to go back down to the sensory motor senses. And this is the title of Wynn's book. We have to recover the senses. We have to re-exapt our spiritual senses again.
And our physical ones in service of spirituality, which is.
But that's the same thing. You're saying the same thing.
Okay.
That's exactly. It's the shame machinery. It's being used for both sight and insight, both for hearing and prophetic sense of being called, both for touch and being in contact with reality. And the two are living through and in terms of each other. Now, what happens when you get that sensibility transcendence, and that's Iris Murdoch, right? And love is the painful recognition that something other than yourself is real, right?
That's great.
Right. What you get in that sensibility transcendence, and this is Wynn, is you don't get a focal object. So he's going through William James, a variety of religious experience. What he's talking about are the moments of metanoia. Yes, brilliant, beautiful book, masterpiece. And the point he's making is it's not adjectival. You don't have a focal object for which you get beliefs about its properties. It's adverbial. And he talks about reality now. It's like it faces you, and it's like a face in which the whole and more than the whole, the mysterious behind the whole, is present in every part, and it's facing you and calling you and challenging you, like the way you face another person. So that's not a focal God, right? And that's an adverbial God, I think. If you, that's how I put it.
Can I tag team that?
Yeah.
So one of the things that Luhrmann said, I just took some notes here. I took a lot of notes, but she says the deep insight here is that talking to oneself is not as powerful as talking to another.
That's right.
And so when you say God is facing you and you are facing
and
God,
you get decentering.
Right. And she says it changes you to speak in public, and an invisible other creates a public space. And now she's anthropomorphizing, which is fine. I mean, that's part of what we do. But I think what we're talking about is a place. You talked a lot about this, right? It is a place and a position and a shift.
Orientation.
It's an orientation.
It's an orientation. And orientation is, exapted from sensory motor. Wynne has a book before that book called Faith in Place, where he proposes that instead of using metaphors based on things for God, we should use metaphors based on place. And what's really interesting is the first instance in history of the use of YWH or YHWH. I won't say the name because we have Jewish listeners, and I want to be respectful. Is indistinguishable. It looks like it's a place name, but it could also be the genus loci, right? Of that place. And and then you get the Kyoto school and Basho saying, this is Nishida. Basho is that non-place in which all taking place happens, right? And so I would say we are faced and placed in this spiritual sense, right? And that sense of placement is like what I'm trying to talk about when people feel at home again. And they don't mean a physical dwelling. They mean they are no longer in a meaning crisis because they are faced and placed and at home. The sense of domicile.
That through line, right.
Yes.
The through line has reestablished itself.
That's right.
In a new way.
And
but with resonance to the past as well. And,
of course. And the word you used is trust. Trust goes back to troth, like in betrothal. And it's also the etymological origin of true, because one of the original meanings of true is to be true to someone. It's an adverbial sense of truth, right? And all of this is, we have lost. And this is why Wynne writes the book as a philosopher, theologian, 4E, cognitive scientist, phenomenologist. We have lost the sensibility of the sacred because we have put it into the supernatural or the ideological utopic future. And all that matters is our ideological commitment.
Which is so ridiculous and has nothing to do with spirituality or very little. And so top down, maybe. But this is what we're talking about is more of the bottom up, right? So, this is, there's a part of me that feels, hey, addiction still carries this sort of shame with it, and that's part of the experience, is that there's deep, deep shame, not around being an addict. There's deep shame around the needs, right? Around the longing, around the loneliness, around deep, deep sort of senses of vulnerability. So what I think here, Bonhoeffer is calling for me, he's calling for me to be in it, to be with it. Now, what affords me the ability to do that? Reaching the rocks was the initial step. So through this whole process of liminality, I started a couple of groups for clients I was working with, and I called them Oars Up. And they're 6-week intensives where it was folks in liminality coming together to put the oars in the boat and to navigate a bit with a kind of collective nervous system. It was amazing. But what came out of it for me was this sort of synthesis of attachment work and spiritual work. And I kind of the 8 R's, kind of Schwartz has the 8 C's. And the first one is to relent. And that every process of shifting perspective and of opening to being met, being faced, being helped, being loved involves some sort of relent. And in my case, and in a lot of cases of addiction, you pull up on the rocks and you have to relent your strategies. And there's a confession that is for your benefit to say, the I that was steering over here, it is not, I am not just this, right? But I can't make that move without there being something else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
right? Mm-hmm. So I want to just say, because I think everyone probably knows it, but the most succinct prayer about relevance realization that I know of, God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
The difference, yeah.
I've not encountered anything like that prayer. And it summarizes this shift that I think is universal. And the important part to me isn't so much kind of what's asked for, but it starts with something. It starts with God. And this is from somebody who doesn't believe in a deity. It is the shift in position that is so vital. It's the decentering.
Yeah, that's McNamara's whole point.
And it's the opening, the opening to the currents, right? Now, that is not done in privacy.
It can't
and
be.
That's extremely important, is it's done in community.
That's not just utility. I mean, this is part of the critique that Arjun and I have been making about meaning. We have made meaning a personal, private preference that soothes our self-esteem. That is not how meaning works. Meaning is shareable, which means it's mutually correctable. How do we get the meaning of English? You didn't make it. I didn't make it, right? We make it collectively and we revise it collectively. The meaning of nice has changed from what it was originally an insult, right? And things like that. Sorry, this is important. Part of the way the ego is held rigid is the way our society tells us that meaning is a personal, private, preferential relationship of self-esteem. This is all dangerous to the opening up and opening into and through reality that actually is meaning. And I think that I wanted to put that on the table.
So I'll add to that, and this is a thesis that's meant a lot to me, especially in the times we live in here in the States. In that sense, of the cultural currents that work against this process, trust is subversive.
Totally.
The cultivation of trust is subversive.
But Seth, what is trust other than shared, mutual corrected meaning? It is to participate in a shared meaning. That is exactly what trust is.
I couldn't have said it better. Now, what I want to make accessible is that, and this is not the solution for everybody, but we often have these conversations and we reach the point of, and where do we find this community? And we're a bit baffled, right? Because
welcome to the meaning crisis.
All we can say is, well, the old structures are gone. Let's all agree with that, right? Well, I just want to offer something hopeful, I guess. That
me too.
There's a tradition that's 100 years old that has never made a dime and has nobody running it or leading it. That was the ecology of practices that completely afforded me the chance to come into metanoia. It afforded me a conversion experience. And it was not a single moment by any means. It was a slow, painfully slow experience. I have a friend who says God moves at 3 miles per hour. And
because God is moving through eternity. That's why.
Right. But you look back after 6 months and it's a bit of a distance, right?
One of the wisest person in my life said to me, it's like a locomotive. It looks like it's never going to get going. It starts so slowly and so incrementally, but that's because so much has to be moved.
Yeah. Well said. Right. So I know we have the constraint of time, so I'm going to move this along just a little bit. So the idea of Gethsemane for me, right, is called into facing some powerlessness, which I think is what Christ is inviting his disciples into. Come into this powerlessness with me. Come into the feeling of being deeply human. Release the shame around it and be with others who in that feeling as well, right? Don't just live this out on a propositional level. Like they would say in a program, you got to make 3 calls a day. Why are they telling you to make 3 calls a day? They want participatory knowing.
Yeah.
They want you to do the reps. You want to go learn how to play golf? Don't read a book.
That's right.
Go take swings, right? So I want to kind of move forward a little bit because life changes dramatically. There's a kind of irony that things begin to fall away. Things begin to arrive. In liminal spaces, things show up and they have deep, deep resonance that they normally wouldn't have, in part because you're so close to the unconscious. You're so close to this stuff that the ego had moved you away from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere in all there, a new partner arrives for me that I didn't see coming. I initiated contact with professionally, not knowing. And, you talk about Sarah. And for me, my Sarah is Kate. And a partnership that's built not on compulsion for the first time, but is built on a sustained commitment to love.
You reliably bring out the best in each other. That's why we bound ourselves to each other. We reliably, doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, doesn't mean we don't hurt each other's feelings, but we reliably bring out the best in each other continuously.
And we stay connected to liminality.
Yes.
Without sacrificing the structures of life. And so these two things, the transcendence and the finitude in this relationship,
help tone us.
Can live together. And the moments of disconnect aren't mistakes. They're enactments that can be learned from and lived through. And so in the second half of life, to find a relationship that orients around growth for both people, where love becomes defined as this sort of mutual escorting. It wonderful. Could not have happened had that perspectival shift occurred. Go ahead. What were you saying?
Well, I was just going to say, it's like you go from a single person having the oars to 2 people in a canoe, relying on each other, right? In a really deep, really deep way.
And in tune with the current. No longer fighting against it.
Exactly.
And you know what happens now when we fight against it? It sucks.
Yeah.
Your relevance realization and your resonance realization resets.
Yep, exactly.
And
you get that shift. Yeah.
Right. So what I sustained and what I tolerated before, it used to be I could live at a bullshit 10, and now I get to a 3, and it's like, it's disgusting. I automatically want to move. Right.
Yeah. That you're in a totally different salience landscaping, not just a different salience landscape. There's totally different salience landscaping. Yes, totally. I use the metaphor, my radar changes.
Yes. I work with couples a lot. In fact, I have thoughts about how all of this can play out via relationship. You don't have to go through divorce to have this happen, but you do need to go through loss and change in your partnerships to have this happen.
Proper grief too.
Well, and all of that can be afforded by the right container, which is part of how I hear my calling in the world. So, yeah, I just read before this that Hermes is the god of awkward pauses. So this is exciting.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
I want to jump ahead in the narrative, and I'm going to trust that this will land. There's a reforming of the practice that I ran at that time, that we rebranded away from my last name to grow, which was this sort of wonderful kind of vision of what we wanted to bring to the world. And so much shifted. Like, it was the end of COVID, and half of our therapists, as most of the workforce, suddenly just changed jobs and decided to go out on their own. And we had a moment where we thought, maybe this is over. Maybe this isn't going to work. And then it rebuilt, and it rebuilt better. And then you and I started doing our talks. And one of the wonderful, weird things that happened is Dick Schwartz reached out, and he and I have become friends. And that gave me the opportunity.
The three of us to talk at some point.
I would like that too. I think we can make that happen.
Good,
and
good.
It gave me the chance to speak at the IFS conference and to talk about attachment. And it's just created these great opportunities, right?
I love to hear this,
It's just wonderful.
A good teacher, and I'm not saying I'm just your teacher, but I'm just speaking here, in terms of my work, if you can see your students taking up and it gives birth in a way that you aren't responsible for, but nevertheless you made that possible. Like, you're a midwife in the really Socratic sense. Like, that gives me joy. Like, when I hear you saying, because of our conversation, Dick Schwartz and you have become friends. It's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's joy for me.
But this is the kind of joy you can access via liminality.
Yes.
That happened. You and I didn't make it. We participate in it, right?
Only participatory knowing can give you the actual sense of things happening by participation.
Which is why the ego must put the oars in the boat.
Yeah, that's right.
So, more bad things come, unfortunately. And this is sort of moving. Now I want to talk about moving out of liminality.
Right.
So, I started the 40s. I'm turning 50 this year. The tragedy, I'm not going to go into great detail, but there's my kids experience a profound loss. The practice that I had built and the deepest friendship that I had.
I think you should let people know. I don't want to take any details from you want to withhold, but there was a profound betrayal of you, which is very hard to take. Betrayal is one of the things that can psychologically traumatize us because it calls into question any kind of just world hypothesis we might have built implicitly. I hope I'm not trespassing, but I think that's an essential piece to make clear what was happening for you. There was a deep betrayal.
I trust your judgment about that. Yeah. I was mixed about sharing it, but I trust it, and it might be important because it's along the same continuum of putting the oars in.
That's what I want to say, Seth. Like, betrayal is the avenue by which the ego often says, I told you so. Let me be back in control. Look what happens when I don't control everything. You can't trust, right? That's why I wanted to put that on the table. This, to me, this is one of the great messages of Jesus. That's one of the greatest moments when we have been betrayed and we think of ourselves as a victim. That is one of the greatest moments of temptation to evil for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. So
I wish I had handled betrayal better in my own past, is what I'm saying. I'm saying something aspirational here.
Where I relate most with Bonhoeffer is the last year that's unfolded.
Yeah.
Where this time around, I felt a kind of capacity to stay in the suffering and not to be lost in compulsion in order to cope.
Yeah.
And what I ended up calling it was living in first gear. I was never able to, in order to maintain connection with self, I could not shift out of first gear, which meant literally one day at a time. And attempting to orient with help, attempting to orient to what was the suffering of the people who worked for me, the clients that depended on our practice, and to strive towards a soft landing that minimized suffering for everybody. And to take seriously that suffering, not just my own. And that orientation allowed me to navigate, and things came in that I didn't control. Somebody came along who was a friend, but a peripheral friend, and had a really wonderful practice that they'd taken such great care to build. And originally I thought, gosh, we're going to have to close our doors. Maybe I can see if they can hire some therapists and take on these clients for us. And we realized, well, we can make it. We can keep floating. But I had to reconcile that I could not. I could not stay in that situation. The pain was too much, and it was time.
Right. Yeah.
And they said, without prompting, they said, what if we could take it? What if we could take it over? And everybody stays, and
wow.
You turn off the lights and we turn them on, and we just, and that's what happened. Yeah. And it was amazing. And it didn't feel like me doing it. I didn't have a sense of pride about it. It just felt like suffering with and staying with and watching it play out.
Can I ask you a question at this point?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a phenomenological question, because I've noticed a difference. It's a phenomenological difference, and it's like the aspect shift that sometimes happens in therapy, where I want to deal with the fact that I'm so stubborn. What do you really like about yourself? Well, I persevere, right? But people do that aspect disguise, sure. Right? So it's like the opposite of aspect disguise. It's a waking up that's an aspect shift. Did you note, and maybe you didn't, but I've noted, and this is why I'm asking you. I'm trying to see, I'm trying to get clearer about it. Meaning is through sharing. Is there a shift from suffering to, there's a lot of pain, but I use a different term. There's a shift from just suffering, which is just and undergoing. I'm undergoing something. I'm trying to get something. It's like when it's a difference between when you're hit and you're in pain, and you're working out and you're in pain. I know there's ego stuff in there, but I'm trying to get at the phenomenology, not the teleology. Do you know what I mean? Where you feel like. Because I'm trying to get, there was something that held you back from the compulsion, and I'm trying to get what's the phenomenological touchstone of that. And for me, I've had moments where it shifts from I'm suffering, which means loss of agency, into a positive sense of loss of agency, which is I am undergoing, and that means I'm participating in something. Yes.
You're placing there.
Yes.
I'm undergoing.
Oh, yeah, so yes.
The sense of self is that something is going under me.
Right.
Right. And I am participating in it without being possessed by it. I'm not losing agency. I'm experiencing agency, but I am undergoing.
That's right.
So yes, it is not pleasant. but
No.
it is ultimately self-building, whereas compulsion is
Self-destructive.
self-reducing,
Yeah.
self-destructive. So what do I mean by self-building? It is like a working out metaphor, right? Like
Yeah.
it is trying to maintain a container that has to hold more, and that container is maxed, but with an ecology not of practice as much as an ecology of support, uh, a borrowing of self from others. So, I mean, this is a wonderful IFS kind of concept of that. That the client can borrow self energy from the therapist, and it strengthens that container.
Yes.
And then the parts realize, oh, there's something here. There's something here, just like that perspectival shift. Parts have that perspectival shift with self, right? So, oh, I didn't know there was something here that was creative and courageous and calm and centered with me and present, and that was reliable and that was actually available. And so, I watch parts go through metanoia, right? And it's controversial because self, Dick would, we would say to Dick, self feels like a place. And he would say it is, but it also has agency, and it's also connected to something bigger, and which I've grown to appreciate about him, how easily he sits in those tensions. Anyway, I digress a little bit.
I don't think that was a digression. I think that's exactly right. I think what you're saying there is the distinction. First of all, I like that you're under the going. I think that's beautiful. So thank you for that. That's helpful. And you're being placed into participation, which means the pain isn't gone, but it has often gone from a meaninglessness, which drives, I would say, compulsion, by the way.
Yes.
To a meaningful. And that's the difference I'm picking up. And meaning is not subjective well-being, and it is not pleasure, and it is not a sense of success. That's what the research shows. And because all of those things fail, and what we ultimately fall into, and maybe ultimately have to flow with, that's the Taoist in me, is that kind of meaning. And meaning always is a way, and it's beyond us. It's not our personal project. It is way we orient by participating.
We throw ourselves unreservedly into life's duties, problems, successes and failures, experiences and perplexities. How can success make us arrogant or failure lead us astray when we participate in that kind of life, right? So, yes. I land in April thinking, okay, I've handed off this practice that has been a self object for me. It's been an extension of myself for 20 years. And I I let go of a relationship that has been probably more defining for me than anything else. There's a deep, deep twinship. And I think, okay, but we'll hit the ground running in May. No, it didn't work that way. And there's been a period of what would we call? I think protective, maybe even firefighter parts, saying not so fast, rest, recover, and the anxiety of how then will I live? What is the vocational calling? What's going to fill this space?
Notice the word you used, by the way.
Which one?
Vocation, calling.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, you know what my managers would love is for that to show up a little quicker. But oddly, again, and this is why I still am doing Oars Up groups, is like there is more structure to me, and there is more structure to the life that I am in right now. I have this wonderful partnership. My kids are growing; they're approaching college. And actually, the work I'm doing now that I'm freed from the constraints of running a practice feels more and more congruent and in line with just giftings, who I am. But what's wonderful is self or the universe is just not letting my ego get much purchase. Although people may disagree with that around me, but it's part of what's wonderful showing up here with you is there are manager parts that are like, oh, this is going to help that sort of come to fruition. And it's like, well, the more I try to perform here, the worse that whole thing goes. And so I'm just going to try and show up and see what happens with John. And here's what's happening. I'm getting some clarity in my life, and this conversation helps too, that what I want to be able to do in the world is to create containers. I want to create containers that constrain strategies, parts, ego, things that are no longer adaptive for people. And in that container, I also want to afford these perspectival and participatory shifts, these different experiences of knowing. And these opportunities present. So one of the ways that I wanted to talk to you about, because I'm actually curious about your thoughts, we discussed this a little bit about leadership. Mm-hmm. And I have kind of two theories. They're probably one theory, and that is organizations are organized energetically top down most of the time.
Yes.
And it does put an emphasis on what is going on in terms of relevance realization and resonance realization in leadership in different systems. They don't have to be corporate systems, family systems as well. What happens if we create these containers that afford liminality or the embrace of liminality? How does that shift not just the people, but the entire organization?
Right.
My fantasy, my theory, I don't know how I'm going to test this so much, is that there would be two ways to do that. One would be, and this is something that my partner Kate does almost exclusively, is assemble a team and bring them into gently into the liminal, where they change their grasp and their perspective towards the what is being undergone, I guess we could say, and what it evokes. My thought is, man, I want to just get whoever the leader is, and I want to get their partner, and I want to get them in a room, and I want to be able to do EFT and IFS, and then I want to see how it changes the rest of their world. Because what I've gotten to watch for 20 years is that attachment relationship is the field where all of it plays out most vividly, where the ego is most exercised, but where there's also the most opportunity to be seen and responded to in new ways, where participatory experience is right there. So that's what I'm thinking about. I asked you about it a while ago when we talked. I'm wondering if, given this whole conversation, I think this is the move towards praxis. How does this kind of play out? Where are the levers of change culturally? That you feel, Seth, this would be good for you, or John, this is where you are moving with this. I would love to hear that. What just happened?
What just happened there is a shift. When we've been talking, I've been very enthusiastic, and at times I don't think you would have experienced it that way, but some people might experience it very aggressive, because I'm very much trying. I'm trying to deconstruct, both the individual and the cultural, like egoic straitjackets that were in that throttle meaning and make people suffer. And that makes me slightly angry. And I'm trying to, it's Aristotle. It's not about being angry or not. It's about being angry at the right time, to the right degree, for the right reason, right? And I'm trying to cultivate that. So that I'm getting that little of that. And then there's a shift where it's like shifting gear, to use one of yours. And sorry, this saying it will undermine it, but you asked me. Where there's a shift to an orientation of humility, which is what I'm now, it just came out to me as the through line. We have been talking, I think, profoundly about, and this is the answer to your question, about humility as a virtue, and how is it properly cultivated, and what does it mean to go back to, but also go beyond, the Christian idea that the best leader is the one who leads from a place of humility. This is exemplified by Jesus, and it's exemplified in Gethsemane. And so what's coming out for me, and part of it was a bit of self-correction too, I'm trying to be more labile in the place from which I'm taking my stand and my stance and my status. I'm watching the 3 S's all the time. And so my answer to you is, we are trying, we have birthed in Dialogos. This is a Dialogos. Ultimately, we didn't propose it that way, but I propose it to you now retrospectively. This was a Dialogos about the virtue of humility and what it really means, and why it's not weakness, and why we should stop associating it with humiliation. That in fact, the best leaders are the leaders who have the virtue of humility, who are able to acknowledge undergoing, and that's a kind, please hear that qualifier, a kind of submission underneath the mission, right?
Very
to
nice.
Catch currents that they cannot be the authors of. And I think that's a profound kind of leadership that is being proposed. That would be an answer to you. What's going through me right now is I'm reading a really powerful book called The Philosophy of Jesus as a Way of Life. And this is what's coming out, this kind of model. And to me, I mean, and of course, Socrates represents a profound kind of humility, the deep, I mean, and you did it multiple times. You didn't use these words, but you kept saying, I knew what I did not know. I knew what I did not know. And he doesn't mean facts. He means, I realized my operating manual needed massive updating, kind of knowledge. That's humility too. And I'm trying to see, how does Socratic humility and Christ-like humility, how do they go together? Anyways, that's what resonated. That's what you picked up on when I shifted. And notice I'm doing it here. Like there's a part of me that, but there's a part of me that wants to hold on to the softness and the silence that humility often demands as a way of presencing the virtue and letting it enact what it needs to do. So that's what was going on.
That was really lovely. I realized as you were talking, and more sort of manager parts, I think, had posed the question, and your response being much more embodied, I think captured kind of a more self-led idea of humility and leadership. Not, as well. I really like the phrase "undergoing" now. How did you put it? Catching the current that we are not
the authors of.
Like
the 2 people in the canoe, right? The 2 people in the canoe. And in the canoe, you're constantly doing rhythmic humility, because you have to let the other person, you keep flipping between who is guiding and directing. And because the 2 of you are trying to create an ability to catch the current that neither one of you alone can do well.
So the thing that I'll share with you that is, I think, most exciting for me is that I've been asked. No, I have the privilege of being very close to this community because Kate works for a group called Conscious Leadership Group, and they do coaching and consulting. And I think one of the moves that's happened as the practice decoupled from me, or I decoupled from it, is that there's been a desire to get out of the clinical room more and to see what happens. And I've done some work with them on IFS and on attachment and how it might be in dialogue with what they do to create a more conscious leadership. And they just asked me to come on and do a more extended training with them. And
excellent.
And that's the stuff that's lighting me up right now. And if some of these ideas we're talking about can make their way into organizations, into people who are setting culture for many other people who spend the majority of their lives in these buildings or in conversation with each other or sharing around a task that they're attempting to accomplish. I'm hopeful that there's the possibility that work, which is the one thing we all seem to still be just compulsively engaged in, could become a different kind of place, a place that affords, I don't want to be too ambitious, but the kind of encounters that we're hoping for people. Places where growth can be nurtured. Yeah.
One of the positive, and I've been a critic of this, but trying to balance things out more. One of the positive features of the Protestant Reformation was to bring work back into a place for the sacred. Of course, we've lost that, and it got translated into a completely secular compulsion to increase profit. But if you look originally, what's going on is the idea that, what part of the Protestant Revolution is that family life and work life are places in which the sacred should be showing up on a regular basis. And so it has
there's
happened
the
before.
Project.
Yeah.
Okay. There's the project. Well, it's a tough sell for people to be like, all right, well, life's going to get a lot better, but it really depends on your capacity for suffering.
Always. You have to die to get your life.
But it really is the case. And I mean and I don't want to be masochistic about it. No. But it's, the ego does become tyrannical as we get older and further into life. And there's a lot of suffering. I'm struck by how he ends the quote about, and I think about your transcendence versus finitude. Yeah. And when I read this, and I just said it before, how can success make us arrogant or failure lead us astray? I mean, he's talking about relevance realization.
That's right.
And he's saying it is by entering suffering that we move into a more optimal grip on reality and on ourselves. That's the spiritual journey.
We're out of time, my friend. But that was a good place to end. Of course, I want you to come back and let's continue this conversation, both off and on camera.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. And I always like to give my interlocutor the last word. So please.
Well, I think I've ended with this word before, but the word that I think my life kind of circles around is trust. Mm-hmm. And I will say it again, that I think trust and the cultivation of trust is subversive. And I hope we all take the chance to build it when it presents.
Excellent words to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.